Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the public, private, and multi-cloud with 451 Research. We're going to go ahead and get started now. We're going to do that by leading off with our speakers, our two speakers, Liam Eagle and Michael Richtberg. So if, Liam, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
So thanks to everyone for bearing with us there, and thank you very much to Nexenta for having me here. My name is Liam Eagle. I'll quickly introduce myself in a moment, but before we do that, we wanted to put a poll question for the attendees on screen and have you just sort of give your response to this poll question as I sort of go through my introduction, and then we'll move on from there. So the question is simply, what are you planning on using the public cloud to host? So while you answer this question, I will introduce myself a little further. My name is Liam Eagle. I am a research manager at 451 Research. And within 451 Research, I work on our Voice of the Enterprise team, which works on surveying enterprise IT buyers and decision makers on various IT related issues. But within that team, I cover what we call the cloud hosting and managed services practice, which basically covers the breadth of sort of off-premises type service provider operated environments, which includes various types of cloud and hosting services, as well as sort of the managed services that may surround them. So, in my section of today's discussion, I'm going to cover some of the trends around cloud adoption and some of the customer preferences and conditions that we see emerging from that research. Hopefully that's given you enough time to answer the poll. It looks like we've got a lot of folks planning to host both data and applications in the cloud. Nobody planning to host just data and not the applications, which makes sense to me. And then we've got quite a few of us who currently don't have a plan for using the public cloud or currently don't plan to use the public cloud. So that's quite interesting. And it leads really well into the stuff that I've prepared here. So if we could just go to the next slide, I can get into sort of my portion of the content, which really deals a lot with sort of adoption of cloud services. So a good place to begin, I think, is this kind of big picture view of adoption across a variety of cloud service categories. So this is an overview of adoption for the various categories of cloud services that we track. So we ask businesses pretty simply, which of these services are you using today, and which are you planning to implement within the next 12 months? And, by the way, this list includes software as a service here because we think it's sort of a portion or a piece of that sort of movement toward cloud in general. And so the major takeaway from this sort of market-wide view that includes software as a service is the use of cloud-based services is now sort of widespread to the point of being really nearly ubiquitous. You can't really see this on the slide here, but just 7% of businesses tell us they're not using any of these technologies. And new adoption is expected in every category. And so another fairly evident point here, as I just mentioned, sort of SaaS has been this sort of safe first resort for a lot of organizations as they begin to adopt cloud. And, to be fair, I'm not sure if that figured into your response to the poll question that we put up there, but I'm sure many of you who may not necessarily have a plan for using public cloud infrastructure to host applications and data may indeed be using some SaaS product that's hosted out in the cloud right now. But SaaS has been this sort of safe first resort for a lot of organizations as they begin to adopt. And though SaaS has always led these measures of market penetration, when we do this kind of polling, as it gets closer to being, almost universally in use, the portion of businesses that's planning to begin implementing SaaS naturally just decreases as the pool gets smaller there. And we see other categories of cloud service begin to catch up. So you can see here, businesses indicate more plans to implement platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and hosted private cloud in the next 12 months. So one way, interestingly, that we look at this data is in this particular question is we compare by company size. In this case, by company size, I mean headcount. And in every one of the categories that's represented on the slide here, we see overall adoption increase with company size. So adoption of various cloud models is always the strongest with largest organizations. And the tends to be the smallest with smaller organizations. The smallest gap between small and large there is for software as a service, where they're pretty much similar in terms of the market penetration. And then the largest gap is for on-premises private cloud, which is in place at about 22% of small businesses and 55% of large businesses. So that kind of makes sense if you just think of things in terms of large businesses more likely to be the business that has, embedded on-premises type of, enterprise workloads and things that they've been operating on-prem for a very long time, whereas smaller businesses are more frequently younger businesses and may have begun at a point where they were able to put more things in the cloud from scratch. Anyway, an overall takeaway from this slide is basically just that the progress of the market overall is toward the adoption of these technologies, and that many businesses that have started with SaaS are moving on to fill in other pieces of that picture over time. So the cloud picture is becoming more complete, but it's also becoming more complex for a lot of businesses. And we can flip to the next slide now. So while that previous slide looked at market penetration and adoption for various types of services, here we begin to look at something that tracks the momentum of these environments a little more directly. So here we ask businesses for a variety of different sort of workload categories. What is the primary environment in which you are executing this particular type of workload today? And what is the primary environment in which it will be executed 2 years from now? Excuse me, I'll give you some detail on the more sort of workload specific response in a moment. And this is the aggregate view of that. So the reason that we say primary environment there is because as more businesses arrive at these hybrid or multi-cloud IT type architectures, we know that not all of these functions are operating exclusively in one environment, right? So as you guys illustrated with your response to the question, some folks want to just put the application in the cloud, but not the data, or models similar to that, where you have something that's being delivered across multiple types of environment or being executed across multiple types of environment. But here we're tracking what the primary environment for the execution of that workload is going to be, or what it is now and what it's going to be. So one, again, sort of top line takeaway from this chart is over the next 2 years, businesses that we surveyed expect off-premises service provider operated type environments to go from being the primary venue for 48% of workloads to being the primary venue for 66% of workloads. So they go from being not most to being most, which I think is, an arbitrary line, but it's sort of a significant, marker to pass, obviously. Another important split, along with the shift toward off-premises environments, is this idea of sort of cloud versus non-cloud. And so we see increases to software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service, and hosted private cloud. We see on-prem private cloud, continue to be the primary environment for the same amount of workloads. And then we see non-cloud environments, both the on-prem ones and the hosted non-cloud environments. We see those decline as sort of a primary venue for workloads. And this response does differ between workload types. So for instance, we see businesses report a tendency towards SaaS for employee productivity functions, which probably makes sense to everyone on the call. Office 365, Google's G Suite, things like Salesforce or Workday. There are a lot of productivity functions that kind of live in in software as a service environments these days. So for specialized business process functions, which might be sort of custom applications that businesses have written or have been written for particular vertical markets, or data processing analytics functions, we see those moving more toward infrastructure as a service and hosted private cloud type off-premises infrastructure environments. And then for back-end business processes, we definitely see a little bit more gravity toward that on-premises infrastructure. So I guess, big picture, we're approaching sort of quite a significant moment here where we see off-premises environments sort of take over as the primary venue for the execution of most workloads. However, businesses are not adopting cloud just for the sake of adopting cloud, right? They are seeking pretty consistently across most of the businesses we talk to, benefits to agility, to total cost of ownership, to performance, to availability, and often to security. However, cloud doesn't deliver any of those things by default. So extracting those specific benefits from a cloud platform will continue to be an engineering and an operational challenge. And then, the way I look at it, sort of the extent to which businesses are able to achieve the benefits they set out to gain will be the actual measure of their success in adopting cloud, or the success, if you want to think of it another way, it'll be the success of the platform at, addressing the business need. So we can flip to the next
Liam,
slide.
this is a pretty dramatic shift that we're seeing here in this short period of time. Maybe you could comment on that relative to 2018 moving to 2020 and such a big difference.
Sure. So I think there's probably two things at work there, right? First of all, I think generally speaking, when we survey businesses or survey folks that operate within businesses, there's and we ask them about their plans to do something in the next 2 years, let's say, and that has to do with cloud. I've been doing this survey long enough to know that in some cases, folks that plan to do something, or some people that express a certain plan with regard to cloud adoption or cloud implementation, they don't necessarily know what's going to be challenging about that. They don't necessarily know what's going to be difficult about that, and they don't know how successful they're going to be just in terms of moving things into those environments. So I would say on the one hand, that future goal is a little bit aspirational, and we might see, I couldn't tell you what the exact percentage would be, but there will undoubtedly be cases where people who aspire to have something running in cloud in 2 years, don't get there. Now, I think there's a couple things to think about there where I think it's definitely worthwhile to measure that intent, because that, sort of begins to express the appetite for these platforms. And then the other thing I would say here is, I would remind you that, this is not where are 100% of all the data and all the workloads. This is where will the application primarily be executed, or where will the workload primarily be executed, right? So there's the sort of primary environment, and then there's everything else. So, there may be sort of incremental movements here where things that are, primarily in one environment today become primarily in another environment, whereas a lot of the, some of the data or some of the function remains in other places. So I think that, the two answers to that question I would say are, this is a measure of intent. So it's not the sort of where will it be in 2020 just can't be an exact science. And then the other thing I would say is that sort of primary environment allows them to say, okay, well, this will be the primary environment, which may not be, to go from having the primary environment be on-prem infrastructure to the primary environment being SaaS may not actually be as big a shift as moving 100% from one to the other, right? It might just be a sort of passing a sort of minor shift, minor milestone of their own.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the question. So can we flip to the next slide, please? So then this kind of gets to that point that we were just talking about. So one perspective on cloud adoption and implementation I find quite interesting is this notion of sort of maturity and the extent to which businesses have made public cloud or infrastructure as a service sort of a significant part of their IT operations. Because, so on a couple of slides ago, we were looking at sort of market penetration, right? So something like 45% of businesses say, yeah, I am using infrastructure as a service in the public cloud today, but I am using, could mean, I turned on a VM and I played around with it, or it could mean my entire application is running in there. So it doesn't measure the depth of the usage, it just measures, it's sort of a binary, are you using it, are you not using it? And so what this kind of measures is the extent to which businesses have made public cloud or infrastructure as a service a significant part of their IT operations. So we already looked at, the sort of general adoption trend. This is sort of more of a look at how public cloud is being consumed in a bit more granular detail. And as you can see, while a lot of businesses are using or planning to use it, only a quarter of businesses say they've broadly implemented public cloud for production applications at this business, at their business. So we use that description, broad implementation of production applications, as a sort of a proxy for what we call maturity in the case of this particular question. And then we can use the idea of maturity as this kind of quasi-demographic persona type trait. And we can use that to sort of see some ways in which businesses who are in that space or that section of this graph sort of respond to the other questions in our surveys in ways that are different from everyone else. So how are the sort of quote unquote mature users of infrastructure as a service different from everyone else? And basically it begins to show you some ways in which businesses undergo changes in their preferences or in their appetites or in their philosophy as public cloud becomes very important to how they execute IT. So for instance, some examples of that are they're much more likely to be using the advanced platform features of public cloud. So they're using machine learning functions or containers management or data analytics functions of the platform. They're also most likely to look at software as a service as, you know, the means of introducing new functions. But in cases where they're building software themselves, they more frequently say that all the software they're building is cloud native or cloud enabled, meaning that they've written it to run on public cloud. They're also more likely to identify public cloud as the sort of primary environment in which they're executing a given workload. However, they also indicate that multiple infrastructure environments are in use for a larger portion of the workloads that they're doing altogether. So collectively, all of these points basically tell the same story. Businesses that have embraced public cloud as a central part of how they operate are more likely to turn to it first, to turn to it as the primary execution venue for a given project. They're more likely to be using advanced functions. However, they're also more likely to be using other infrastructure environments in combination with public cloud. So we can assume that most businesses sit somewhere on that spectrum, and that they're generally, and I mean, I don't want to speak for anyone who's sitting on this call, but I would say that, you know, I wouldn't assert that you're moving toward this stage of maturity, but I would assume that you're moving toward the stage of maturity. I think most businesses are moving toward there. And so using this kind of mature persona as a way of looking at how they're different, you know, might provide some insight into what might change or might need to change about your perspective or your approach as you get closer to there. So can we flip to the next slide? So I guess let's add some additional context to this discussion of cloud adoption, right? So we ask businesses about their future IT strategy, and I think importantly, most businesses do not expect to be all in on public cloud in the foreseeable future. And, you know, I'm sort of susceptible, you know, covering the things that I cover, I'm sort of susceptible to the marketing of the, you know, big public cloud vendors or just the statements of the big public cloud vendors who tend to see the world as this sort of inexorable move toward public cloud. And I think, you know, most businesses say their plan is to move toward a hybrid IT environment that includes off-premises and on-premises resources in sort of an integrated fashion. And that's that sort of 58% response at the top there. But again, this is another question sort of sentiment, right? We ask, what is your plan? And that's kind of notable because that 58% that says, you know, hybrid, on-prem and off-prem integrated together, you know, that's more than is using a hosted private cloud right now, or infrastructure as a service, or on-prem private cloud. So, you know, they don't have the things in place today, but this is where they intend to go. And I think this really illustrates that businesses are planning for a future in which they run a hybrid or multi-cloud environment. Something I think is important to point out here is that, you know, we talk to a lot of businesses, and one of the things that we hear often from the sort of more in-depth interviews that we do, not the sort of the web-based survey type of stuff, but that we also do these in-depth phone interviews with some commenters to add color around that. And something that we frequently hear is that, you know, hybrid cloud isn't necessarily a sort of organizational strategy that businesses have in place from the outset of cloud adoption. It's often something that sort of happens, or that they put in place as a reaction to, you know, consuming a bit of SaaS here and a bit of infrastructure as a service here, and then maybe they set up a hosted private cloud, and now we have to figure out how to make it all work together to make it all manageable by the same team and the same groups. And so hybrid cloud often, as it happens, is a solution to a management problem. As a technology solution to a management problem, but it's not, it's rarely sort of a strategy that the business has from the outset. But knowing that this is a likely outcome, to the extent that it's possible, I think, you know, it's interesting to think about businesses sort of considering choosing technologies that support that sort of multi-cloud integrated environment that they may ultimately pursue once they start trying to effectively get their arms around the entire cloud environment, right? And so if we could flip to the next slide. There we go. So for respondents who indicate to us that they're planning to use multiple environments to execute workload functions, we ask them, what are the main drivers for hybrid cloud? And, you know, although things like security and compliance frequently come up elsewhere as sort of inhibitors to the use of cloud environments, the main drivers here are improving performance and optimizing for cost. And by the way, for that segment of mature infrastructure as a service users, the #1 driver that they give us is actually optimizing for cost at 48% of respondents. So it's worth noting that in cases where businesses are using multiple environments, the objective is very often, most often, to extract some additional performance and availability or some cost benefit from the mixture that we're using. And I think that's a little bit different from in the past where folks might have said, oh, we won't move the data out of this environment because we feel that it's very, you know, it's a security risk to put it anywhere else. Now a lot of businesses are telling us, we won't move the data out of this environment because it's the most cost-effective place to run it, or it's the most performant way to set up this infrastructure. So that's quite an interesting thing. If we could flip to the next slide, I can start to get into some additional detail about, you know, what kind of cost savings are available through multi-cloud and hybrid environments. So the capability to achieve savings relative to the average cost of public cloud via using multiple platforms or multiple vendors is something that we track at 451 Research via our cloud pricing index, which is a project that is run by a colleague of mine, Owen Rogers, who's a very smart guy. And so with the CPI, we track what we've created these benchmarks that we describe as a large basket of goods or a small basket of goods, which are sort of typical architectures for a large or small application deployment. So it's not just how much does a VM cost, or what is the price of a bandwidth or an increment of storage. It's really, to actually run an application, what does it cost on this particular platform? And then we average out the cost of those platforms. We can do some comparison there. And what this chart really demonstrates is that in the conditions that are most favorable to savings, which is that sort of large basket of goods being deployed via sort of on-demand pricing. So it's not, reserved instances or anything. Sort of if you take the most expensive case, which is just sort of using the on-demand resources to deliver the large basket of goods, you can reduce the price of that by 78% off the average market price by optimizing through multiple vendors. And then there are, various other potential savings displayed on the chart, but that's sort of the maximum amount. The point here is that although, cost has often been cited as a concern with public cloud for some businesses, or, it is the #1 criteria by which they're evaluating some of these services, cost should not necessarily be a concern, or it shouldn't be a concern in a sort of absolute sense. Of course, there is some corresponding cost to management and integration overhead associated with sort of operating across multiple environments, but the fact that with a little bit of engineering effort, cost savings to this extent is possible. One of the key target benefits that we keep discussing is achievable via the right strategy. I think that's a pretty important thing to understand about public cloud. And then can we flip to the next slide? And so along with the prospective cost benefit of those sort of concerted engineering and integration efforts at sort of multi-cloud environments, I wanted to also be clear that there are other sort of potential cost benefits just simply to using cloud. And so using some of the same methodology as on the previous slide, also from the cloud price index, and including those same large and small basket benchmarks for pricing out the cost of cloud, CPI illustrates basically how the sort of basic cost of public cloud infrastructure and resources has been declining steadily over the past 4 years, and are expected to continue declining in that direction as, hyperscale cloud platform operators and other cloud platform operators become more efficient, continue to sort of compete for the business of customers. They're finding, other ways to drive, better margins with advanced platform features, and they're not focusing on really extracting that from the core operating components. Basically the cost of cloud continues to decrease. So for businesses using cloud, this means that even absent of any advanced multi-cloud cost optimization efforts, the cloud customer, just by being on the sort of OpEx utility pricing model, is able to access the benefits of this ongoing decrease in the cost of cloud in real time. And Michael, we were talking about this a bit before, but did you have some you had some observations before? I don't know if you wanted to sort of jump in here and add those.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is different too here is that the cost decreases are part of your decreasing billing as you're adopting a cloud platform, as opposed to something that would have been typically a hardware-based only model, which would have locked in a price where you would have had it for the length of its durable use. In this case, what you'd see is a declining bill over the life cycle of what was deployed in the public cloud environment, right?
Yep, that makes sense to me. So if we can flip to the next slide, I can sort of wrap up my portion of this. So I'll conclude my portion of the webinar. Rather than just read through these sort of bullet points here, I'll just sort of point to a few of the key things. So what I would leave you with is that cloud adoption is pretty ubiquitous. Almost every business is using something, and many are planning to use more. And most businesses are looking for roughly the same set of benefits from cloud adoption. So they're looking for benefits to agility, to cost, to performance, to security, et cetera. But those benefits are not easy to achieve. You can't just take an application and throw it into AWS and expect it to be performant or be secure or be available or cost less or any of those benefits. There's an engineering and operational challenge there. But one of the solutions that businesses are arriving at is this sort of multi-cloud or hybrid strategies, and that's happening for a variety of reasons. But one of them is, but many of them are specific to the benefits that they're seeking, and that this multi-cloud or hybrid strategy is not necessarily an interim step. So it's not a stepping stone on the way to sort of all-in engagement with public cloud. It's something that's being embraced by those mature users of public cloud as well. So I would suggest that most businesses should recognize that unless they're a really special case, their journey to the cloud is very likely to end up in some kind of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud type of environment, and should consider sort of starting with the end in mind in terms of making technology choices that support or allow room for that likely outcome, so that when it comes to getting to hybrid, it's a matter of enabling a few features or functions rather than sort of re-engineering a big part of your IT infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who can give you some of the sort of Nexenta point of view on some of these topics. And thanks for listening to me.
Great, thank you, and appreciate, Liam, your expertise and your time attending today. It's been very beneficial hearing your point of view and what you're hearing from your customers through your research. This is Michael Richtberg speaking. I'm a Nexenta advisor and an industry expert in various virtualized infrastructure offerings, with some specialization in particular in software-defined storage and cloud-based infrastructure. What I think I'd like to just cover with you here is some echoing of some of what Liam covered with you. When it comes to data, the point I want to emphasize first here is that location still matters, particularly if the applications are intended to remain on-prem. If you're looking for a high-speed experience, then connecting a workload to a data store that's remote is probably not the ideal way for you to get the best performance out of something. So the proximity of data to the application remains an important part for application migrations. But the other is, as noted here, regulatory reasons might be reasons for you to consider data remaining in an on-prem deployment model. As you look at, though, leveraging the extensibility that the cloud capacity has to offer, and that your offering is to increase capacity, your ability to get the agility that Liam mentioned before, the ability to get that out of something that won't require you to re-engineer an application, meaning the application use of the storage and the protocol that those were designed to run with, is an excellent way for you to take advantage of that capacity, and the elasticity, infinitely adjustable, is going to be a benefit for considering a public cloud-based option. But rather than building another location or co-locating or leasing something else, the AWS-based deployments offer an excellent way for you to get that combination and to be able to make the change over time. The pragmatic aspects of this is we've just seen from Liam's content and in your polling response we heard at the beginning, and as we've been hearing from thousands of our customers, hybrid is going to enable a pragmatic transition to and from public cloud platforms. So being able to take advantage of the combination is something that's going to be around now for a while. For many organizations, the combination of cloud and on-prem infrastructure will make a lot of sense. And as workloads or storage requirements expand into a public cloud environment, having some way of dealing with the combination of cloud and on-premise is an excellent option. Lifting and shifting may not be your preferred option. So true hybrid may mean the ability to use some combination of one of the cloud platforms as well as also on-prem at the same time. But being able to do this with a single management interface is going to make this much, much easier as this transition might occur. Could move to the next slide. So what we've been hearing from our customers about what they're doing with the applications or their workloads for when it comes to storage are some key examples. And one of the first that comes up often is DevOps. Getting everybody to be quickly able to work on what they need to for application engineering, designs, and innovations, and being able to do that swiftly with little bureaucracy and getting things done, and being able to do it again with applications that you're already using that use these standard NAS or SAN an excellent way to leverage cloud infrastructure rather than possibly having to wait for some infrastructure to become available on-prem. Another use case is a perfect example is the ability to have some central point of hosting file capacities that are available through a centralized mechanism such as on AWS that require an NFS or SMB protocol, provides a simple centralized access mechanism for users or applications. If you need more capacity, if you need the, like the idea of the geographic proximity to where the users are and want it to be perhaps in that local proximity, that this is an excellent way for you to get geographic independence. This might be more and more important as you think about data governance as well with some of the newer regulations having to do with data privacy. Another excellent use case here that we see coming up often is backup, DR, and archive capacities that continue to just blossom as we consume more and more of our data and need more and more capacity for keeping track of that and more restore points. Having an option of using something like AWS's infrastructure to keep your data safely stored somewhere else for a recovery, not just for perhaps restoring to an on-prem, but think about the disaster recovery option that you might have of being able to host the cloud VM so that you could do a restore to something that's available to you as well. So being able to use a cloud-hosted instance to restore a VM to get your fixing something or going through a disaster recovery is an excellent option. The enterprise application migrations, as they occur and as they make sense to occur, is also a common occurrence. Being able to use existing Windows and Linux applications with standard SAN or NAS protocols makes a lot of sense for making this transition easier without re-engineering the applications to what might be considered cloud-native storage options. Getting all of the lifecycle management, all the data safety, all the storage efficiency services in a cloud-based deployment that you've been used to for your enterprise storage systems is another example of something that you shouldn't need to leave behind as you choose to make use of a cloud-based architecture. All of these options can be provisioned instantly with full monitoring, control, and flexible capacities, as we'll show you here. in what NexentaCloud offers. This is just a block diagram example for you of how NexentaCloud is deployed quickly on an AWS platform. Using the AWS Marketplace, where you can select a license capacity, and in a few clicks, you're literally able to get your virtual storage controller and the storage accounts associated with your capacity needs to provision a full-fledged NAS or SAN. We've taken all the guesswork out of making the right decisions about what instance to load the NexentaCloud on, and that's because we know that there are some challenges often that may come up about designing for performance. So we've taken care of all of that for you by making it simple, and simple by installing the image necessary for NexentaCloud on the right instance. Your ability to create an SMB or NFS share or an iSCSI LUN allows you to leverage a wide range of AWS media types, ranging from hard disk drives to high performance all-flash storage. Now, why that's important is because if you were thinking about a conventional storage infrastructure, you typically would pick some combination of these performance types, meaning hard disk drive for capacity, SSD for all-flash. But having the ability to complete a system that has some combination of any of these concurrently, meaning that we can allow you to connect to any combination of the SSD or hard disk drive capacities, to be able to provision LUNs and shares from those in any combination that you want, is vastly different than your conventional hardware-based storage systems. And that's because what you're being able to do is attach to any number of the 4 or 5 different storage types that are available from AWS. They all have different cost and performance points, but that's the beauty of this, is you have the ability to pick and choose that combination that suits your workload needs and your cost and performance requirements as is necessary. And this is adjustable over time, so it doesn't stay that way when you pick it. It can be something you adjust as you need to. Leveraging Nexenta Store, you also get the benefit, which is the on-prem option. Nexenta Store is the on-prem offering. You get the benefit of something that can operate on-prem, and NexentaCloud operating on AWS provides a true hybrid storage capability. Whether it's to expand your capacity, whether it's to protect the data, and using things like we offer in the snapshotting and replication, you'll have the ability to migrate data or applications there. And that Nexenta is providing both sides of the equation. And to be able to do this in a managed form is what we're going to cover here in just a second. So on the next slide, what we're here showing you is an example of a rollout that might involve some combination of you're using something that's on-prem in your private data center connected to NexentaCloud for your configuration of the extensibility or for migrations or your snapshotting of backups, etc. The other might be that you're also dealing with multi-site situations, and those sites might be remote office, branch offices, etc. And having something that can be acting as a hub makes a lot of sense in this case for NexentaCloud to be that mechanism. So the benefit you're seeing here of the multi-array cloud management infrastructure is something we're going to talk a little bit more about in just a second. But being able to unify all of this is where it becomes a big challenge if you don't have the right tools to know what's going on in each of these different locations for your different storage systems. All of the Nexenta options are software defined for flexibility. So the whole point of these 3 places where things might operate are so that you have the ability to use whatever you would like in terms of capacity, in terms of media. And the key thing is we've taken the pain out of all of the configuration options you might need to think about by the well-documented reference architectures with all of our partners. That includes the cloud and on-prem, so that we take the guesswork out of what you need to do to get these infrastructure options delivered to a software-defined mechanism done quickly and easily. On this slide, what we're showing you here is the key point of all of this being ideally manageable, and that's through Nexenta Fusion. And Nexenta Fusion is your hybrid console. This is exactly where you'll be able to see all of the instances running Nexenta software, whether it's on-prem, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's in your branch offices. And this is your single pane of glass for managing all of the instances of NexentaCloud. Nexenta Fusion is the true unifying mechanism. So you're seeing basically a graphical user interface here of all of the instances that are discoverable automatically through Nexenta Fusion, being able to deploy this for better visibility and advanced analytics that provide excellent visibility into what things are happening where, seeing what you're getting out of the various usage patterns, keeping it all under control, and what if you need to make some changes? Well, Nexenta Fusion is providing the mechanism for the ideal way for adjusting your storage needs over time. So based on what you might be doing today and it changing, it might be beneficial for you to have exactly this type of tool to be able to make this change easily. What Nexenta Fusion is offering on AWS is a free option. So this is not an extra charge. This is bundled with the NexentaCloud option so that you'll be able to deploy hybrid right off out of the box. And just like NexentaCloud, this management system is deployed in just minutes using the prepackaged image that's available on the AWS Marketplace. You can also, as an option, run this on-premise as well, so that you can manage it from there if you wish instead. So on the next slide, just to wrap up, one thing that we know folks out there would probably like to get some help. And we're here to help because this transition isn't an overnight thing, but we know that it may take some help from somebody that's got the expertise to help you with figuring out just how to get this type of enterprise flexibility out of storage in a hybrid mechanism using AWS and NexentaCloud. If you'd like more information, please visit our website. We have an excellent white paper that covers more of the industrial trends that Liam covered, as well also as what's driving hybrid use cases and more details on just exactly how NexentaCloud works. We take the guesswork out of it in the form of deployment, but we also did this white paper to help you with an understanding of exactly how all of the infrastructure rolls out, including things like the extensibility of the different storage accounts that AWS offers and how to best leverage those. Remember that NexentaCloud on AWS is providing the ultimate in flexibility for whatever your storage needs may be. And as we discussed, the ability to maximize the different storage types is an excellent flexibility option. So whether you need hard disk drives for capacity or whether you need SSD for performance, and all the performance characterizations that those have coming with them, we offer any combination concurrently that you need for that. So with that, I want to thank again Liam for his help and his expertise from the 451 Research Group. Always been a very big fan of your organization and the excellent insight that your company offers. Thank you, Liam.
Hey, thanks, Rick. So maybe when while we have folks submit their questions, I can ask you a question. So, you know, in our discussions of this before, you had emphasized, as you were just emphasizing a moment ago, that sort of, you know, access to the various sort of types of storage account options that AWS offers is sort of a key feature for the Nexenta users. Can you give me some more insight into why that is?
Yeah, I mean, picture your on-premise deployment where you may have picked that you are going to use something that's got a workload that's satisfied by hard disk drives. And then you need to add something, though, that's sensitive to IOPS and latency. And you want to add that, well, you typically go out and have to get another piece of infrastructure physically. And then if you found that there was some adjustment of those combinations over time, you're again kind of fixed into what it is that you already bought, or you have to go ask for more budget to get other options. What you're going to have an ability to do using the AWS storage account types is mix and match them over time in any combination that you would like. So if you chose today to need something that was going to be capacity oriented because you just want a DevOps project to go and you want to do it as cost effectively as possible, performance isn't critical because it's not been rolled out, then that's great. But you decide now to put that application into production and you want to make sure that perhaps a hosted website is really snappy. You need all of the high performance you can get out of it. You want to make sure that your transactions are not getting clogged up with a performance problem, and now you're rolling it out into production, then great. It's going to offer you the ability to make the change to that SSD-based deployment for perhaps running the operating system of hosting that website. The same thing might be said for a database or other use cases that are performance oriented. So being able to mix and match and switch is an infinite flexibility that is unusually a benefit of a cloud-based deployment.
Right. So I can sort of prioritize IOPS or capacity or what have you, or price at a very granular level when deploying storage.
Yes, and changing it over time and not being stuck with what you picked initially is another key point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Liam and Michael, we got a couple questions in from the audience, and as a reminder, folks, we've got a few more minutes. If you'd like to ask questions for Liam or Michael, please just use the chat function, and we'll add those to our list here. So maybe one for Liam. Liam, a question about what reports do you provide that explain more of the cloud adoption trends and advice? So kind of what reports may have highlighted in your presentation, or others that might be out there that are good for individuals wanting to learn more from 451?
Sure. So I mean, I guess I would start with my my own reports, right? So what basically I publish on a quarterly basis a sort of a full view of what we're doing with the cloud hosting and managed services voice of the enterprise study, which is really a sort of demand side study of what our business is buying in these categories. And it goes quite a lot deeper than what I've shown you today. And on a quarterly basis, we look at a lot of this was from workloads and key projects, but we have these sort of quarterly themes that we do. So the most recent one that I'm working on the results of now is called organizational dynamics, right? So what does the changing dynamics within your IT organization, how does that affect your use of public cloud and vice versa, right? How does cloud affect your IT organization? We have a quarter where we do vendor evaluations. We have a quarter where we dig in on budgets and sort of spending outlook. And then in addition to that, I also mentioned in the presentation that we have the sort of cloud pricing index, which is another sort of data product that covers, the sort of the fluctuations in cloud pricing over time and helps to model some things for people there. And then we also do a lot of sort of qualitative look at what the vendors are doing, right? So we have a lot of analysts who talk to the vendors a lot, and we publish reports just about sort of what their sort of go-to-market strategies are, what their product strategies are, and things like that. And that applies to, the public cloud vendors. It also applies to, sort of the everyone else of that market, where folks who might be doing hosted private cloud or focusing on providing services that help to enable people to implement cloud. So, we sort of cover the breadth of what the cloud vendors are doing, and we try to cover the breadth of what the cloud customers want the vendors to do. And we kind of try to sort of exist in the middle there and try to help everybody.
Great. Thanks, Liam. I think we got time for one more question, and I think this one, Michael, would be for you. Why are the various AWS storage account options such a big deal for customers using NexentaCloud?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned before, the ability to have that flexibility and do it concurrently, right? So it's not like you're picking a Nexenta instance and installing that virtual storage controller and having to pick a singular storage account. Your ability to mix any combination of the storage accounts is a really key part, so that if you had a different NFS share, for example, that you wanted to be SSD based, and another NFS share that was oriented towards perhaps saving data that was a bulk, and you wanted something that was less sensitive to performance and wanted more of a cost point, then having another NFS share that was available to enable that to occur doesn't require you to have another instance of NexentaCloud. So our point here is the function of storage is now something that doesn't require you to physically unmount media and remount it as you would physically to a new virtual storage appliance, but rather your ability to make the change in literally the amount of time I've had in answering your question is extremely flexible, and again, a benefit of having the agility of using somebody else's infrastructure physically to go with the software-defined storage system that NexentaCloud provides.
Great, thanks, Michael. So folks, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you again, Liam, Michael, for your time. Huge thank you to all the attendees of today's webinar. Greatest apologies from Nexenta for the challenges up front, but thanks for sticking with us. We'll be getting the slide and a cleaned up version of the recording out to you in the next 24 hours. And again, as Michael and Liam mentioned, if there's any questions, please visit Nexenta.com. A lot of great resources there and easy ways to get in contact with us. Thank you again for your time. Wish you a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, guys.